Everyone, thanks for joining us today. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll give folks another minute or two before we get started. Alrighty, I think I'll go ahead and kick us off while folks continue to trickle in. Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Christi Economy and I'm a research associate at the Terner Center. We are really thrilled to be hosting a conversation today on how public housing agencies and other local entities are using housing vouchers effectively, despite facing structural challenges like tight housing markets and resource constraints. We'll also lift up key considerations for understanding and responding to the current shifts in the policy and funding landscape. Before I get started, I'd like to thank our funders at the Wells Fargo Foundation and Cooper Housing Institute for their support of Terner Center's research on housing choice vouchers. We are recording today's conversation and we'll make it available on our website. So we'll start the webinar with a short research presentation to just kind of provide some context on the Housing Choice Voucher program and the different strategies that public housing agencies are using to make it work well. Then I'll turn it over to Ryan Finnigan, Deputy Research Director of the Terner Center, to introduce our expert panel and start our moderated discussion. And then this will be followed by questions from you all. You can share your questions using the Q&A feature at any time. So I think it's important that we kick off these conversations with a recognition of how crucial the Housing Choice Voucher program is. It's the largest source of federal rental assistance and provides more than 2.3 million households with a voucher for renting in the private market. And these vouchers are a critical resource for many different reasons. First of all, we know that they work to stabilize households and alleviate the impacts of our nation's housing crisis. So the voucher program has consistently been shown to increase housing security, reduce homelessness, and improve family well-being. The program also serves all different types of low-income households, and in many places, vouchers primarily support families with children, seniors, or people with disabilities. And the vouchers can have distinct benefits for many of these groups. So for example, for children, growing up in safe, stable housing can lead to better health, education, and employment outcomes later in life. And for seniors, as they exit the workforce, access to a voucher helps to reduce rent burden and allow for aging in place. So folks over 62 can stay connected to their families, support networks, and doctors. Finally, we know that voucher holders in every state across the country would not be able to afford their rent without access to the voucher. So for the average voucher household across the country, their total monthly rent is greater than their entire monthly household income. So despite their success in keeping households safely and stably housed, vouchers are a scarce resource. You've probably heard that only 1 in 4 eligible households currently receive federal rental assistance. And program complexities and tight housing markets can make vouchers difficult to use even after receiving one. In 2021, only about 60% of households with a voucher were able to successfully use it after 6 months. In the quote here on the slide, one voucher holder describes these challenges saying, "I went through the training class, I watched the videos, everything I had to do for the Section 8 voucher, and I'm unable to use it. It's like a waste of paper." Public housing agencies also face many complexities and challenges with administering the program. So most notably, the budgets that PHAs have to work with often fall well short of rising rental costs. One PHA leader described this tension as, "It's a balancing act, trying to find that sweet spot where we're able to issue vouchers and not outspend our budget authority. I'm checking per unit to see what costs are to see if we're able to issue more vouchers." To overcome and mitigate some of these complexities, we've heard in our work many examples of public housing agencies trying to use the voucher program as effectively as possible in ways that work for their communities. So I'll just highlight a few examples here of PHAs working to navigate tight housing markets, support both voucher holders and landlords in the program, and contribute to greater supply of affordable housing. So tight housing markets are a nearly universal challenge, and many of the PHAs we've spoken to express frustration around the rate of rental price increases. To try and mitigate some of these difficulties finding a unit, many PHAs offer the maximum search times allowed and regularly grant extensions to households trying to use their voucher. Other PHAs described adopting higher payment standards to give voucher holders more options by allowing for higher rents, and sometimes geographically targeting these to open up new areas for voucher households. One PHA leader, for example, said, "We really do try to maximize the choice people have to live in higher opportunity neighborhoods by funding those at a higher level than other neighborhoods." These strategies come with trade-offs, of course, and don't work for every community because allowing for higher payment standards often means being able to serve fewer families. But many PHAs that we spoke to are being really thoughtful about these trade-offs and described, making different decisions based on their local context. And as probably most of us know, and as I've mentioned, it can be really difficult for voucher holders to find a unit that both works well for them and meets the requirements of the HCV program. So factors like limited landlord participation, low vacancy rates, time-consuming administrative processes, or just, the inability to pay first, last month's rent and security deposits can all make it really difficult to find a unit. So to address this, many PHAs described their efforts to provide accessible staff that help connect voucher holders with units, including through things like housing navigation or one-time cash assistance. For example, a small PHA in New York partners with the local universities so that master's level social work students provide extra case management and support to voucher holders. In another example, a large PHA in Florida has a partnership with the county to provide security deposit assistance to voucher holders who need it. Relatedly, many PHAs have also developed engagement strategies to better recruit and retain landlords, including hiring landlord liaisons to conduct outreach or help troubleshoot issues that come up, or providing cash incentives directly to landlords for leasing to voucher holders. One PHA leader kind of described these types of efforts with the quote on the slide here saying, "We're trying to approach this from a customer service perspective. If we were the client, the landlord, how would we feel if we were interacting with our organization?" And some public housing agencies are also taking a very active role in producing and preserving more affordable housing units. And this can help provide more options for voucher holders and potentially reduce the per unit costs. So for example, PHAs are increasingly project-basing vouchers, which means attaching their voucher to a building or a unit rather than a person. Using project-based vouchers in coordination with relevant partners like state or local governments, the continuum of care, affordable housing developers, can help get more affordable housing units built. One PHA leader described project-based vouchers as probably the most effective tool we have in developing units. There are limits to how many vouchers can be project-based, and again, PHAs are often weighing trade-offs around providing either project-based or tenant-based vouchers. We've heard from other PHAs that are working to coordinate housing development and preservation sort of outside of the HCV program as well, in order to contribute to greater supply in their communities. For example, we heard from one leader at a mid-sized PHA in Maryland, reflecting, we're not just a housing authority. We do bond issuance and loans, and we have mortgage financing. We're actually the biggest developer in our county. And so, as we all know, public housing agencies and other local stakeholders are doing all of this work amidst significant uncertainty with funding and policy changes at the federal level. So the end of the emergency housing voucher program means that public housing agencies are working to figure out sort of if and how they can continue to support, approximately 60,000 households that were served with those vouchers, many of which who had were previously experiencing homelessness. And then we're also hearing about potential rule changes around mixed status families, time limits, and work requirements, all which could have significant negative impacts for many voucher families. So it's a really unprecedented time. We're eager to hear more from some of the folks working day in and out on these issues. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan Finnigan, Deputy Director of Research at the Terner Center, who will introduce our panelists and moderate the discussion. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Christi, for sharing all those research highlights and spotlighting a lot of the great work that you've been leading with us. And so, like Christi mentioned, we're really fortunate to have this panel of experts with us. They're going to help us all learn more about how they're leading these efforts and about the potential changes that they're facing in federal policy and resources affecting the voucher program. And so first up, we have Sonya Acosta, who is a senior policy analyst at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which is a nonpartisan research and policy institute that advances federal and state policies to help ensure that everyone has the resources they need to thrive. Her work focuses on policies that help all people with low incomes afford housing, including improving and expanding federal rental assistance programs. We also have Preston Prince, who is the executive director of the Santa Clara County Housing Authority, one of the nation's largest public housing agencies, where he leads efforts to expand affordable housing and support economic mobility for low-income families. With over 30 years of experience, he's developed thousands of affordable housing units and shaped housing policy at local, state, and national levels. And then last but certainly not least, I'm delighted to welcome Pam Taylor, who is the Senior Vice President at the King County Housing Authority's Housing Choice Voucher Program. Pam is a native Washingtonian with more than 25 years of experience in the housing field, and she provides leadership for a program that administers over 14,000 housing choice vouchers, partners with about 3,000 landlords, and supports 119 employees. And so we've got a variety of questions for you all. I've tried to cut down my list of 400 questions to a much more manageable number, while also saving some time for audience Q&A at the end. Just as a reminder, there's the Q&A feature down at the bottom where you can add your questions for the panel, and we'll try to save time for as many of them as we can at the end of the session. So first up, Pam, I think of the King County Housing Authority as especially innovative in a lot of ways. You're often trying new approaches that are meant to serve more families and help them thrive. The Creating Moves to Opportunity study is one of my favorites in terms of how much it really kind of took big swings and provided a lot of constructive lessons. And so I'm curious, what are some of the most notable innovations that you think of that you're trying to turn into standard practice for how you all administer the voucher program?
Great. Thank you, Ryan. For one, like you had stated, KCHA is committed to innovation. And that was, like you said, reflected in our CMTO, Creative Moves to Opportunity Areas, and also in the Emergency Housing Voucher Program, where we achieved outstanding outcomes, where we experienced the highest lease-up rates, and particularly among the most vulnerable populations, including individuals experiencing chronic homelessness. So from these initiatives, key practices were standardized. I'll first start with our strategic partnerships. So we built on over 2 decades of collaboration with supportive program agencies that help us with our family unification vouchers, our VASH veterans as well. And we also leveraged the strength of our newly established continuum of care agency, which is called KCRHA, King County Regional Homeless Authority, which is so close to King County Housing Authority. So imagine that. And which we heavily depended upon them for our success of the EHVs. We also have, like Christy mentioned, landlord engagement, which is very important. KCHA maintains strong relationships with both new and longstanding landlords. This year alone, we've added 198 landlords to our program, and we average about 300 a year. So we conduct biennial landlord surveys, with the most recent one showing that 69% rated their experience with KCHA as good, and 82% would recommend KCHA to other landlords, which is very, very important, as we know that through these programs that we did not have to use the landlord incentives. We just have a really great program, and we have 2 dedicated owner liaisons that we credit for these high ratings. We also provide quarterly virtual trainings for our landlords and co-host an annual landlord symposium with 2 of our local PHAs. In addition to that, we have workforce housing, over 8,000, in which KCHA sets a strong example of leadership and commitment in our workforce housing, with approximately 20% of participants residing in units owned by KCHA. So we really pride ourselves on that. And like Christi had mentioned, also housing navigation. So for both the CMTO and EHV programs, we initially partnered with external housing navigators. However, we found that having internal navigators would better serve our families. So we now have 2 dedicated staff members who provide personalized support to families navigating this complex and competitive housing search process here in the Pacific Northwest. We've also, because of our area, we streamlined portability processes. Between KCHA and SHA, we are very close in proximity, and we have about 2,000 of their portable vouchers. And at the time of EHVs, we had about 3,000. So we are very, very high in our portability vouchers. So we both work together, and we work with the same continuum of care providers. So to reduce the barriers and accelerate lease-up timelines for families with portable vouchers, we introduced a universal application. This simplified the approach that helped ensure a more efficient and accessible process for applicants across both housing authorities. So one more, in addition to that, is one more win that I like to share in response to the region's growing housing crisis. KCHA continues to push towards our 2025 goal of efficiently acquiring and developing new affordable housing units in both underserved communities and in high opportunity areas. So in 1 year span, KCHA has added 395 new units across the county. And I just want to highlight one perfect example of innovative, successful practice is our Kirkland Heights redevelopment, where we added a 3rd story to an existing development, which created 48 additional units on top of which included total units was 96. So I just would like to share the innovative approach, even though during these unprecedented times.
Wow, thank you, Pam. That was awesome to hear. And there's so many more things that I want to follow up on, but I'm going to try to restrain myself a little bit, just to make sure that we're covering more ground. And so, Preston, I think of the Santa Clara County Housing Authority in much the same way. When I think of your agency, I think of you both trying to implement, but also develop and refine best practices in a really concerted way. And I'm curious how you think about and strategize the most effective and highest use of the resources that you have. And if you have some particular examples of how you're directing your resources toward a particular kind of impact.
Yeah, well, good afternoon to everyone who's listening in. Really excited you're participating in this conversation that I think is so important. And the reason why I think it's so important is here in the Bay Area, it's not 1 in 4 families who are able to who are eligible for a voucher who get a voucher. It's 1 in 6. So we have a really high demand for the program here in the Bay Area and Santa Clara County. I want to just say +1 to everything Pam said. It was like, I think we're going to kind of cover the same areas. I'm trying to think of some additional things. But we are trying to, as a move to work agency, both King County Housing Authority and Santa Clara County Housing Authority are move to work agencies. We're part of the legacy original 39, but now there's 139 housing authorities. And the idea is really to use our move to work strategies to either get waivers from HUD or to deploy the limited resources in unique, creative ways. But before I get to move to work, I want to talk about some of the same things that Pam talked about that we are doing here, really addressing the navigation, the supporting of voucher holders and landlords, and creating more supply. So we have 2 programs that I wanted to highlight. We have something that we call to help support our families. We do a blitz, right, where we have all of the staff who will be able to not only issue, but get, take the intake, but issue the voucher all in one small period of time. So we have like 50 families show up. They get the orientation. While they're doing the orientation, the calculations being done, and the end of 3 or 4 hours, they get the voucher handed to them. And we do 2 sessions in a day. And we're able to get a large number of people out and quickly looking for their homes. We really find that to be the thoughtful kind of the customer service that needs to happen. And if I could take a second, because I just want to give a shout out to Matt Morton, who used to be at the University of Chicago, Illinois. I heard him speak maybe 10 years ago, and he talked about like, why can't, when someone comes into the housing authority, why can't we, instead of saying, hey, you're broken and we know there's something wrong with you and we're going to catch you as you try to take advantage of the system, why don't we say, we love you and your family and that we want to be serving you? And I feel like what has happened at housing authorities is this like pressure for compliance at the federal level. The HUD is not necessarily seeing if we're having great outcomes. They're really measuring these outputs, and they're measuring to see if we're catching people who are taking advantage of the program. It's just the wrong approach. And so the customer service that you heard at King County Housing Authority is the customer service that we're really employing in Santa Clara. So we're calling this our year of customer service, so that we can really make sure that our landlords and our voucher holders are getting the assistance that they need to have an efficient kind of experience within the program. So with those 2 things, I'm really proud to say, just as Pam was talking about, we're serving 4,000 more families today than we were 4 years ago. That's through efficiently using our Section 8 program. It's about being creative with our local, our move to work strategies, including local non-traditional activities. It is about acquisition of properties, and it's about new construction. We are going to be trying to replicate what happens in King County in terms of acquisition of properties, and we're hoping we can add that 3rd leg to our portfolio growth strategy. One of the things that we do with Move to Work that I'm really excited about, and our board just passed this last week at the board meeting, is that we are supporting 3 different interim housing projects in King County. Just wish I was in King County, in Santa Clara County and the city of San Jose. What we do is we have a partnership with Santa Clara County on our Willow Street studios. This is our first interim housing, kind of like a bridge housing in my, I call it bridge housing. So as people have been identified for permanent supportive housing, the voucher will be issued to them, but the building's not ready yet. So for 3 or 4 months, they're staying at Willow Street Studios, and the housing authority is paying the operating costs of that development. So that has been so successful. We've had almost 600 people go through that program in the last 2 years. Over 85% are going into permanent supportive housing. And most interim housing success rates is around 20–25% of people going from the interim housing into permanent housing. This has a much higher success rate. So it's been going so well, we're replicating it with the city of San Jose at 2 different sites. One is called Pacific Motor Inn, and the other one is another hotel owned by the city. And so our board just agreed to support the operations at those 2 sites. Altogether, costs us about $5 million a year. $15 million over the next 3 years is our commitment. And we're really hoping to see a large number of people go from unhoused into permanent housing through that partnership.
Thank you, Preston. Again, like my list of questions keeps getting longer, and so does the audience. So this is exciting. So to turn it over to Sonya, I think, obviously Christi mentioned these big uncertainties that folks are trying to work within, and a lot of these great efforts that Pam and Preston are describing are really kind of in the midst of this. You and your colleagues at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities have been tracking these kinds of issues especially closely. And so, what are the kind of circumstances that are most connected to these efforts that Pam and Preston and other PHAs are undertaking around the country? What are the circumstances that they might be facing, as well as the circumstances that the families that they serve might face?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan, and thanks for having me. It's so great to hear all of the great work that Preston and Pam and their teams are doing. And I'm afraid I'm going to really shift the tone talking about what's happening at the federal level. Because like Christi mentioned, there really is so much. So I'm going to focus kind of on two buckets. The first is around funding, and then talk a little bit about some of the proposals that she mentioned. So obviously, funding is a big issue. We are in the middle of a government shutdown. I'm in DC and getting updates about discussions, but I have no information for you all about when we might see an end to the shutdown and where negotiations will end up. But I do think it's really important to talk about the fact that one of the reasons that we are kind of at this standstill right now is that the Trump administration has unilaterally and sometimes illegally undone the bipartisan funding laws that we passed last year. And they've done that through rescissions, by just withholding funds. If anyone is familiar with the COC builds funding that was supposed to go out for permanent supportive housing, just holding on to that. They've canceled grants. So a funding deal is really only a deal if it sticks and if both sides and all parties agree to it. And members of Congress shouldn't be expected to vote for a compromise bipartisan legislation just to have it undone later. We want to know that the final funding levels that we get for the voucher program are actually what is going to be available for housing agencies and to go to families. And that funding is really needed. As I'm sure Preston and Pam are well aware, and anyone else out there who is at a housing agency, many housing agencies across the country are in shortfall and don't have enough resources for the year and are having to stop leasing and stop reissuing vouchers. And they're taking other cost-cutting measures because it's necessary, but that can also mean that the program can be less effective and impactful, make it maybe less appealing to landlords and kind of create other challenges because these housing agencies are having to change their policies. While HUD does have resources to help agencies in shortfall, they said earlier in the year that given the magnitude of the problem, that more funding would be needed before the end of the year. I've been hearing kind of like some mixed reports about where things are in terms of funding for the shortfall, or I'm sorry, during the shutdown. So I think it's just something that we'll all need to kind of watch and hopefully get clear intel as things go on if this isn't resolved quickly. Also, as Christi mentioned, agencies are running out of funding for the emergency housing voucher program, and HUD is encouraging agencies to transition families into the voucher program. But if housing agencies are already struggling to fund their voucher program, it's going to be very difficult to actually transition families who have EHVs into the HCV program. And so, my organization and other national groups have really been trying to push Congress to get some additional resources so that housing agencies can actually do that, financial resources. The President budget came out, earlier in the year, it included some really drastic proposals to completely change the federal rental assistance programs and overall cut funding for all of them by almost 50%, saying that then states could just make up the rest, while they were also proposing cuts to other programs, telling states to make up those costs. I'm not sure where states are supposed to get all the money to do all of these things, but fortunately the House and Senate did not incorporate those proposals, but I do think it's important for folks to just kind of track where the administration might be kind of moving and what they're thinking. Unfortunately, even though the House and Senate didn't include the big cut, they didn't provide enough funding in their bills to fully renew existing vouchers. And already, as we've kind of touched on multiple times, there are not enough vouchers to help people. So the House bill provides flat funding for the program. And as folks are probably aware, flat funding in the voucher program acts as a cut because we need additional assistance each year to address increasing costs and increasing rents. So under the House proposal, about 400,000 fewer people could receive assistance. The Senate bill did include an increase in funding, but that would still be insufficient according to our estimates. And that could result in about 200,000 fewer people receiving assistance across the country. And obviously that would kind of play out differently at each PHA. So there are a lot of other things happening around fair housing as well that can have big impacts on PHAs and families, around the COC grants. And those are all things that we are tracking, but I also just want to lift up some of the proposals that Christi mentioned. So ProPublica last week released some reporting that included leaked drafts of 2 proposed rules. One would prohibit mixed status families from receiving assistance. So mixed status families are those where at least one member of the household is not eligible for assistance based on immigration status. So it would force all of those families to either move out or to separate as a family. And it would also require citizens to provide additional documentation. So that creates additional administrative burden for both the families and for the PHAs. The other rule that we've kind of gotten a leaked draft of would allow non-moving to work agencies and project-based rental assistance owners to implement harsh work requirements and arbitrary time limits. This is just another way to take assistance away from people. The time limits could be as short as 2 years, and residents could be required to work up to 40 hours a week. I'm not going to get into that too much more, but just kind of want to lift it up. We're not serving all the people who need it. We're seeing increasing homelessness. This is really not the time for taking assistance away from people through these cuts or rule changes, but that is unfortunately kind of where this administration is pushing things.
Thanks for helping us kind of get a handle on all the different moving pieces, Sonya, and also for being willing to take the kind of downer portion of the Q&A. I'm sorry for doing that, but thank you for helping us understand what's going on.
I want to go back to my house and crawl back under my blanket. That was pretty depressing.
Well, I'm sorry, Preston, but you can't, because we need you to keep leading all of these great programs for all these great people. So thank you also for being willing to face it all. So Pam, in terms of the innovations that you were describing earlier, I'm curious, how are you all kind of seeing this uncertainty affect your day-to-day operations, if at all?
Yes, so I'll bring us back up. So we are definitely in a time of uncertainty and are taking a multi-pronged approach to maintain program stability. As you know, in Pacific Northwest and King County, our last point in time count was over 16,000 homeless individuals. So although faced with uncertainty, KCHA is exploring new models on a small scale, though, designed to help families progress towards self-sufficiency and ultimately transition off of the HCV program. So for one, we are starting a homeownership program. We've called it Dream to Keys, and it's designed to help higher income families transition into home ownership and transition off of the subsidy. So it allows eligible tenants to apply their housing choice voucher assistance towards monthly mortgage payments. So we call it the MAP payments. While this may seem controversial, it offers several key benefits. One, the overall cost of the voucher program decreases over time. It promotes long-term stability and it creates intergenerational wealth. And if you just think about how much we are spending in HAP costs, and this is just money that's just gone, right? It's tossed away. But if we are creating an asset, it is creating intergenerational wealth. And if you know, for our program, they must invest 3%. So they must put down 3%. So they're invested into this and they will take care of their own home. So we currently have 3 searchers right now. So we are proud of this new program. So we're also gearing up to launch a new, it's called Young Adult Prosperity Program, YAP, a targeted initiative designed to support youth aging out of foster care or who have been in the child welfare system. So we're recognizing that our foster youth to independence voucher, it's called FYI, are among the most resource intensive vouchers on the program. So we believe that true self-sufficiency for this population is best achieved by pairing housing assistance with coordinated services and employment. So this integrated approach helps to ensure stability, promotes long-term success, and empowers the youth to thrive independently. So since these are term-limited vouchers available up to 5 years, our goal is to use the insights gained from the app program to support a smooth and sustainable transition to independence. So when I talk about small scale, we are starting with 25 enrollees. So our skill building is financial literacy. We're doing credit visibility, also career planning. And we're also offering a financial incentive up to $500 a month with saving opportunities as well. In addition, as if that's not enough, we're also exploring direct rental assistance and alternative rent policy pilot in partnership with MDRC and HUD. So this program would replace traditional income-based rent calculations with a simplified fixed rent structure, with the goal of reducing administrative burden and creating stronger incentives for work and self-sufficiency, which we know this administration is pushing. So more to come on this pilot.
That's great. Thank you, Pam. And I think you also, there were a couple of audience questions that were asking pretty specifically about that you kind of really hit the nail on the head. So that was helpful to hear. Thank you. And Preston, curious about both, if you have a response to that question, but also about how much you and your team at Santa Clara County have really been leading on thinking through how to proactively maintain stability for people supported by emergency housing vouchers in California. And so we'd be grateful to hear what's on your mind when you're thinking about the best practices for ensuring stability for those folks.
Sure. So let me start with the EHVs and then can come back. I do think that amazing things are happening at the local level at housing authorities and in communities. And so I think it's happening across the country, not just move to work agencies, it's everywhere. I'd love to highlight what's happening here and what I've heard at other places. If I can talk about EHV real quick, I know that it was earlier mentioned that it's about 60,000 families. I think it's 58,000 families. 25% of those, 28% are in California. So it's particularly an issue here in California. So the program initially was funded through 2030, 2031, something like that. A partnership between the Continuum of Care and the local housing authority. So the referral made by the Continuum of Care, the housing authority providing the voucher. There were, as was previously said, landlord incentive dollars and other mitigation dollars to help lease up. And the EHV program was wildly successful in how fast it was leased up across the country. And everyone did something a little different. I know that King County and Seattle Housing Authority focused on a certain population. We did as well. So we focused on families with children. We realized that we had about 1,000 families who with children who are on the street, and we got 1,000 EHVs. And so we were able, I think about 900 of the vouchers went to families with children. It's 2,000 kids who moved off of the street and into housing. So we were heartbroken when we found out a program that we thought was going to go through 2030, 2031, that the funding was going to end in 2026. Some people, the funding is going to end as soon as February. Our agency, it goes through the end of the year, but everyone is in a little bit different of a place. So the cost for the federal government, if they just kind of took care of who's at risk right now, would be about $200 million for 2026, but it's about $1 billion a year for every year after that. So what HUD is saying is that they have an expectation that the local housing authorities will absorb the EHV families into their existing Housing Choice Voucher program. For us, it's, as I said, 1,000 voucher EHVs. We have about 500 voucher holders turn a year, so it takes us about 2 years to absorb. And we think it would cost us around $45 million to absorb the EHV program. And while we have the financial strength to do that, not very many other housing authorities do. I think someone just said 30% of EHV families can be absorbed within their existing housing authorities. So 70% are at threat of losing their housing. We have been working here in California. The housing authorities have been working to identify just what is the volume of the problem, what's the size of the problem, what's the demographics of who's being served. And we're having conversations both at the federal level, but also at the state level, local level, philanthropic entities about, and our COC partners. We need help. We can't solve this problem alone. There are many housing authorities in California that are in shortfall, meaning that they are not getting enough money to lease up to 100%. And there's no way that they're going to be able to absorb households. And if we do absorb households, even if we absorb our 500 about EHVs a year over the next 2 years, that means it's going to come at the expense of serving families off of our interest list. It means it's not being able to meet our obligations under our local non-traditional activities potentially. It means that we're not going to be able to issue project-based vouchers to ourselves or to development partners to continue to grow the supply of affordable housing. So it's a pretty dire situation. I wish I could say here's the path forward. I don't think that there is a clear path forward. Every time I hear something very creative by a local housing authority, it turns out that HUD denies the approach. And the answer really is just a straight out absorption, and that's just financially not going to work. So I wish I had good news on EHV. It was an amazing program that got for us families with children off the streets. If not for the program, those same kids are going to end up back on the streets. And then I do think that there are many different creative things that we're doing. I'm really excited, and Pam was talking about the youth program. So we did a partnership with the Wilson Center to provide both permanent and transitional housing for transitional age youth. Half of the units are transitional and half are permanent housing. We were able to use our Move to Work funds and our Move to Work initiatives to be able to provide capital funds and operating dollars for that program. So what we're doing, 1 in 6 families who are able to be served, as King County Housing Authority is doing, is that the board has this untenable job of prioritizing who gets helped within the community. Seniors, families, transitional age youth, unhoused people. I mean, it's just like, everyone is really important, and yet we can't serve everyone. And so what you hear are the interesting kind of little one-off developments that are locally important, but in the end are not serving the entire population. They're small little demonstrations. What I'm hoping we can do is be able to prove that things work and then scale up. I mean, it goes back to the idea that there should be more dollars that help invest in our housing programs. And then the last thing I'm going to say, because this applies to move to work agencies particularly, is or specifically, as a non-move to work agency, you have both unit limitation and budget authority. So we have budget authority limitation, and under our last move to work assessment, we're at 103% of our utilization, meaning we're serving 103% of the number of families we could serve. So again, that creativity, innovation allows us to serve more people, and I know it's only 3% more, but with the crisis that we all have in our local communities, it's important for us to be serving more.
Yeah, thank you, Preston. And Sonya, I think maybe this will be our almost last question for the panel before we turn to audience questions, which there's a lot of great ones. We've been hearing about like the trade-offs that might have to happen for PHAs, and how there's a lot of difficult choices that need to be made because of these circumstances, as well as potentially big changes that you mentioned around new requirements or time limits. And I'm just curious about, what does the evidence tell us about these things? So where have we seen things in either research at the center or by others about how PHAs or HUD might have had situations like this in the past? And what do we learn about how they could impact families and agencies?
Yeah, so first I'll just kind of talk about like remind folks who this program serves, right? Like Preston brought up some of the groups, and thinking about the priorities that PHAs are forced to make. And looking at the program as a whole across the country, the majority of the people who receive assistance are women. About 40% are children. Quarter have a disability. About 16% are over the age of 62, so older adults. And the vast majority are Black and Latina people. And so I think it's also important to put those numbers into context, because these groups are more likely to receive vouchers because they already disproportionately experience barriers due to our country's long history of racist and sexist and ableist laws and policies, particularly in housing. And I know this administration is not fond of talking about those things, but that doesn't mean that they aren't true. And it also means that the cuts and these changes that the administration is pushing will disproportionately harm these groups who are already marginalized and are being targeted in many other ways by this administration. So one example I kind of want to lift up that folks may or may not be fully thinking about, because it's not super directly related to housing, is the impact of the Republicans' mega bill that passed earlier this year. So it has the really wonderful One Big Beautiful Bill name, which does not really describe it at all, because it gave the wealthy a huge tax break while making cuts and changes that will leave millions of people without food assistance and healthcare. Households who receive vouchers and those who need vouchers are also very likely to receive assistance through these other programs. And so losing that assistance for them will make it even harder for them to pay the rent. And we could see increases in homelessness. So even these things that are happening that are not directly related to our housing programs are going to have a huge impact on them and on the people that we are trying to help. And so I'm going to connect that a little bit and talk a little bit more about the work requirements and time limits proposal too, because those are also deeply rooted in racist ideas about Black and Latina people being lazy and not wanting to work. We know that the majority of people who can work do work, that participate in these programs. Those who don't have a disability or an illness, they're older adults, or they're caregivers, and they just can't afford to pay for childcare or some other sort of care for people in their family. And And those who do work don't have control over what jobs are available to them or who hires them. They don't have control over how much they get paid or how many hours they're given. So imposing these requirements are not going to change those economic issues. And we've seen research showing that these work requirements are not effective. And one thing about them is that documenting the work that people are doing is a huge burden for folks. And so people who are maybe actually meeting those requirements still lose assistance just because they didn't submit the right paperwork or the paperwork in time. And it also, of course, will create huge administrative burdens for PHAs. And thinking about the time limits, there's also a lot of research that shows that placing time limits on rental assistance doesn't help prevent homelessness. So there was a study comparing outcomes over 3 years for families with children who had experienced homelessness. 34% of the families that received only 18 months of rental assistance became homeless or living doubled up. That's 34% of those families at the 3-year mark, compared to only 16% of families receiving that ongoing assistance. So it's a significant difference. And the rate of people who were experiencing homelessness after receiving that time limit assistance was about the same as those who just weren't receiving assistance at all. So it didn't make any difference in the long run. So imposing kind of those time limits is going to be incredibly harmful. And again, these are just ways to take people off of assistance and further limit an already incredibly limited housing social safety net. And just to lift up to like that these proposals will have a huge impact on kids in particular, right? 40% of the program is children. A large percentage of the people in households that would be impacted are children. We know that vouchers are a critical tool for housing stability, and we know that having a stable home has a plethora of benefits for kids. And so, right, just again, I say it every time I can, we need to be making rental assistance more plentiful and easier to access, and instead of pushing these harmful policies.
Great. Thank you, Sonya. And so I'm trying to keep an eye on the clock, and we've got a ton of really great questions. And we're going to put into the chat some links to a couple of recent studies that Terner has done, including one in collaboration with the RAND Corporation that we published about less than a month ago. And it includes many chapters because we learned so much from really smart, thoughtful people like our panelists. That there were just many chapters that it took to cover it all. And I think some of the audience questions will be answered there. I'm going to try to maybe just combine a handful of them that I think hit on some themes and then toss them to the panel. So if folks want to do some rapid fire responses. I think one of the questions that might be especially relevant in the current environment is that a number of the audience members are asking about partnerships where, like, what is the opportunity for state governments to try to help fill some of the gaps or prevent some of these losses? Similarly, working with homelessness service providers or housing developers or state housing finance agencies to try to amplify what resources you have or the activities you're undertaking. Preston, Pam, I know you do this a ton, and Sonya, I know that the center has had an eye toward how state governments are part of the equation too. So curious, like, what do you see as the most important or promising things that can come from housing agencies and these other kinds of partners working together as closely as they can?
I can say for the King County region, us in Seattle Housing Authority, we partner really closely with our agencies and service providers. However, when we had a collaborative meeting, they were facing the same kind of cuts. So it's one of those challenges where we're all in the same boat. So, looking at the region, and I just mentioned that for KCHA, we have about 650 of the emergency housing vouchers that are remaining on the program, which is about 17 million in cost. what's a year. So then you have Seattle Housing Authority, which also has about 500. So that's a cost of like 12 million. So just within those, within our two housing authorities, Washington State does not have the ability to absorb that type of funding, and no agency is able to assist us.
And I just want to really recognize Secretary Tamika Moss at the newly formed Housing and Homeless Agency at the state. She's currently over business affairs or business consumer affairs. So we've been meeting with her, the housing authorities have, on a regular basis, having conversations about what are the resources at the state level to help. We've also been meeting with philanthropic groups, obviously meeting with the continuum of care, not just locally, but other housing authorities are doing this. So looking at are there ways to transfer families from the EHB program to another program. But as Pam pointed out, other programs are also receiving funding cuts. I saw a question about, is there a way to do rental assistance through the state? My understanding is California state constitution does not allow for like the ongoing, like multi-year commitments of funding. So the rental assistance, they're not able to do just yet. I think people are contemplating some kind of constitutional amendment. That would be great. The other problem that we're finding with philanthropic groups is that they're not quite willing to make the multi-year commitments that's necessary. So Pam just talked about her and Seattle Housing Authorities at 30 million, our programs at 30 million a year, right? And philanthropic entities not willing to make a 30-year, multi-year commitment. So it's a very difficult situation, but we have to work with our partners and figure out ways to absorb or to get new revenue streams in to make sure that these families are protected.
And then Sonia, I know that the center recently did a look at state rental assistance and local rental assistance programs. Right. Where do you see an opportunity potentially for states to help shore up what the uncertainties or the hard times that the housing agencies might be facing on the federal front?
Yeah, I think really a lot of what has already been said is so important, is right, that coordination and collaboration, and getting as many people to the table who need to be there to talk about what resources are available, what challenges are coming up, and how all of those challenges overlap in terms of the impact on the family, and kind of using those resources most effectively. And as a federal person, I'll also just say that I think that sort of collaboration is also really important for not giving up on federal advocacy and pushing your state's delegation to make those asks and get the funding that is needed. Obviously, it's an uphill battle, but the more that they hear from people in their state, the more impactful it is. So just got to make that ask to you all as well.
Yeah, thank you for that important reminder, Sonia. So I see that we're almost at time. I genuinely wish I could trap everybody on this call for another 5 hours so that we could continue to hear more and more about this. But we also heard how much these folks have to do. So we're going to go ahead and wind down here. Thank you again, panelists, for sharing your time, your experience, and your expertise. I think a lot of folks are looking for information, ideas, but also maybe just a little bit of community right now. And that's very helpful to be able to share with us all. We are going to follow up on the Terner Center's website with a recording of this webinar as soon as it's able or processed. And we're also going to follow up with some resources that we hope address some of the questions that we didn't have time to get fully into today. And if you'd like to keep tabs on what we've got coming out, please sign up for the Terner Center's newsletter. It looks fantastic. We had one that just came out yesterday that highlighted this webinar today. Maybe that's how you found it. Wouldn't that be great? Because then you're ahead of the game. All right, thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll follow up with more info and resources soon. Thank you again, panelists.